So for question 4 for paper 2, this is quite a tricky question, but if you approach it with a strategy, you can score good marks with it. And the way that I think about it is that, for example, if you've done the literature paper, then you would have had to compare two poems. And the strategy that you use for this can be very similar to the one that you may have used for that sort of question. We'll go through a strategy that I think you should use in a little bit. Okay, so you're going to get a question and it's going to look just like this. Compare how writers use methods to present their point of view. So methods just means language, form, or structure. Now, form is a little bit difficult to analyze with this one because they'll be either writing in an article or a letter, or it could be something private like a journal or a diary, or it could even be an interview or anything like that. So it may be difficult to analyze the form. You could possibly say something like an article is used for public consumption. So if they've got maybe some kind of moral point that they're making, like the example which I'll show you, then maybe you could say the point is that they're trying to teach the public about certain lessons that they've learned about their children growing up. But I'm going to suggest that for this question that you don't worry too much about form. I'm going to suggest that you really worry about language and structure. And I'll show you how I've approached this. So in terms of structure, what you can do is analyze the beginning and the end of each one, and then pick a language technique and analyze that as well. Okay, so the way to do it is that you analyze the beginning of one in one paragraph, and then you compare that to the beginning of the other one in another paragraph. The next paragraph is going to be some aspect of language, so you just pick a technique with its simile, metaphor, etc., etc. Analyze that as much as you can, make perceptive points about it, and then the next paragraph you do the same for the other source. And so you're alternating paragraphs until you get to the end, and then you do the same for the end as well. You'll see for mine that because I've actually gone over the amount of words that I wanted to write, I've actually just combined them at the end, but you'll notice the structure in a bit. So this is the sample answer which I've done, and this is a sample answer for a question that AQA asked in one of their sample papers, which I can't show you because of copyright. So we're just going to have to go through the answer and hopefully it'll make sense to you. So I'll read that to you and then I'll analyze it for you afterwards. Both writers convey a nostalgic view of their children growing up. However, Heritage combines humor and sadness as well, while the Victorian author combines sadness and even regret. Heritage begins by establishing the paradoxes of the first year of his son's life, both the longest and the shortest year of my life. We get a sense of both the strangeness and the wonder of witnessing his son growing up, but he uses a type of morbid humor to explain that I haven't slept for a year and I don't know how time works, suggesting he is now looking back on the struggles of rearing his son with a sense of humor. Conversely, the Victorian author begins with a mysterious list of descriptions, such as he had black eyes with long lashes, portraying a deeply nostalgic view of her son, but the sense of mystery makes it seem almost as if the child is dead or has disappeared. However, we are surprised to understand later that the tragedy is that the son has now grown up and has left the house. Heritage then begins the second paragraph with a rhetorical question: how is he one already? Which helps to build further on humor established in the first paragraph. Sorry, that should be the humor. However, his next sentence is long and complex, which incorporates a list. First he was born, and then I blinked, and now in his place is a little boy. The effect here is one of compressed time, as if time has vanished between him being born 1 year ago and the present time. The same idea is reflected in the complex sentence: a year ago he was a sleepy ball of scrunched up flesh, but is now his own person. Here the comma separating the metaphor of scrunched up flesh and but now appears to represent a pivot point between two time periods, which emphasizes how the writer feels time has disappeared. In contrast, the Victorian writer goes against our expectations in her fifth paragraph by ridiculing the idea that because her son has left the house, she should be delighted to be at liberty for concerts, lectures, and parties, to which she responds to the contrary: but I want responsibilities. This appears to suggest that the writer sees family life as far more important and joyful than what society expects of her, and that family responsibility is where she believes true happiness actually lies. Heritage's shock at the pace of time develops into sad acceptance. Oops, should be acceptance. Sorry, I'm just going to edit that live. Acceptance. Oh, I made a hash of that. Acceptance, sorry. So, Heritage's shock at the pace of time develops into a sad acceptance that the joyous time of child rearing will soon come to an end, which appears to illustrate the idea that he truly values these moments and does not want them to end. However, the Victorian writer ends with a shocking statement that if I had been more to my little boy, I might now be more to my grown-up one. We are surprised to find that the author feels she may not have been such a good mother to him when he was growing up, and now that he is gone, she is living with regret that she cannot change. So if you're analyzing the form, you could say something about that. For example, you could say that because it's written in the form of an article, that she's possibly trying to teach the audience a lesson about making the most of the time that your children are growing up, because that time will disappear, and then if you don't make the most of it, you're going to regret it. And so she's living with this regret, and she wants other people to avoid that. So you could make that point about form if you wish. You'll notice there that I've written it's 524 words. It's quite important. This is quite a lot of words. It's possible to do, but what you have to remember with this exam is don't go over the time that you set yourself for each question. So the way you think about it is that you go at 1 minute per mark for each question. So this question is 16 marks, which means you want to spend probably a maximum of about 19 to 20 minutes, not more than that. Okay. If you have a little bit of time later on, you can always come back to it and add a little bit more. But don't go over that, because what will happen is you'll compromise the rest of the questions. And while you may score a lot of marks on this question, you'll lose marks on the others. So in other words, there's no point writing, 4 or 5 pages of an excellent analysis when the question's only worth 16 marks. Just make sure you try and score the maximum that you possibly can, and then move on to the next question. Especially considering that this is only the second highest, the marks available for this are only the second highest in the paper. The highest is actually question 5. So you need to balance the whole paper, and one of the skills of this exam is time management. Okay. So what I'll do now is we'll have a look at the same answer, but I'll show you with color highlights how we've actually structured the answer. So, going back to the points about it being 524 words, you could possibly skip the introduction. So I've only included that really for kind of aesthetics, just to make it look nice and seem professional, but it's not absolutely necessary. So you could skip that. And then I suppose you could actually skip the ending as well, if you don't have enough time. If you have enough time, then obviously do both of them. And if you feel confident in your speed of writing and your analysis, then I would actually go for both of them, because it gives the answer a nice rounded feel. So if you were to skip the first paragraph and the ending, that would leave you with just these middle paragraphs. You've got basically 4 paragraphs. So basically you're analyzing the beginning and the language. And so therefore you've got structure and language. And if we have a look at the amount of words, so I'm going to go word count, and it's 380 words, which should be doable in 19 to 20 minutes. Okay, so if you don't feel you're confident enough to do all these paragraphs, just analyze the beginning and the language, and that'll be probably enough. Okay, just make sure you're writing your perceptive points in there. Okay, so if we're looking at the highlighted answer, so I've included source A. You'll notice I put source A in brackets, A in brackets. Obviously, you don't need to do that in exams. I'm just doing that just for illustration for this lesson. Okay, and so A is in yellow highlights and B is in the green highlights. And you'll see how I alternate. So you've got yellow, green, yellow, green, yellow, green. You see the last paragraph, the ending, I've combined both of them. So I've analyzed them side by side. In the grey highlights, so the grey highlights is where I signal structure. So for the GCSE exam, they will accept it if you talk about beginnings, endings, middles, and all this kind of stuff, focus, etc., etc. So begins by establishing, so there I'm analyzing structure. How does he begin? He begins by establishing the paradoxes of the first year of his son's life. By the way, paradox is a type of contrast, so it's where you have opposites close to each other. So, for example here, both the shortest and the longest year of my life. Remember, when you analyze as well, it's a good opportunity for you to think about what techniques you can use in your writing. So if you see how he uses the contrast here or the paradoxes, use that in yours as well. Use a similar idea, because it's a very effective use of structure. So you notice begins here, so notice the beginning there, and then beginning here as well. And the next one, I'm going to analyze language. So here, rhetorical question, and the next one, ridiculing. Okay, it's not necessarily language, but the tone is ridiculing. Okay, and then the next paragraph is just the ending of both of them. Okay, so in blue, we've got the quotes, and again I've embedded the quotes, so that's one of the things you want to really focus on. You'll see here I've been forced into using long quotes. If you need to do that, that's fine. Generally you want to try and focus on using shorter quotes, but if you have to use long quotes, I've had to do it because there's so many complex sentences and sort of important clauses that are really difficult to break down. If you do need to break down the clauses and remove some of the words, you can do that by using ellipses. So for example here, a year ago he was a sleepy ball of scrunched up flesh, but now his own person. So that kind of makes sense. You could do that. So I've just skipped some words in the middle to shorten the quote. Okay, so in green we're talking about the author's perspective, which is what this whole question's about. So we get a sense of both the strangeness and the wonder of witnessing his son growing up. So I've mentioned the effect on us there as well, we get a sense of, but the strangeness and wonder of witnessing his son growing up is his perspective. But he uses a type of morbid humor to explain that I haven't slept for a year. And so he also uses humor, and that's also his perspective, suggesting he is now looking back on the struggles of rearing his son with a sense of humor. Okay. The next one, portraying a deeply nostalgic view of her son, so that's her perspective. But the sense of mystery makes it seem almost as if the child is dead or has disappeared. So that's her perspective as well, even though I'm talking about that in terms of the effect on us, but that's still her perspective because that's how she sees it. It's almost as if he's no longer there. He's disappeared or dead because he's no longer in the house. So the effect in the next one, the effect here is one of compressed time, as if time has vanished between him being born 1 year ago and the present time. So that again is the author's perspective. He feels as though time has just sort of vanished and disappeared. And I've said the same in the next one. And the next one I've said, this appears to suggest that the writer sees family life as far more important and joyful than what society expects of her, and that family responsibility is where she believes true happiness actually lies. So basically what happens in this text is that because her son has grown up and has left the house, her friends sort of suggest to her, well, you're free to go to parties and lectures and concerts and all this kind of stuff. And then she kind of goes against that and says, but I want responsibilities. And so the implication is that she's not really interested in sort of shallow entertainment. She wants that fulfilling feeling of rearing her child again, and that time is now gone. And obviously at the end we learn that she says, if I had been more to my little boy, I might now be more to my grown-up one. So there seems to be an element of regret there, and that she hasn't actually done all the things that she probably wanted to do for him when he was growing up. Okay, so that's question 4. Just think about your structure. Remember to analyze the beginning of one, the language of another, and then the end of them. Sorry, the beginning of both, the language of both, and then the ending of both, if you can. If not, then just focus on the beginning and the language. Okay. Notice as well, before we go, that even though, let's say for example, I'm analyzing language in this paragraph, notice I've still said begins the second paragraph. So I'm still infusing structure into the question, some into the answer. So I'm making it quite a detailed answer. Okay, and even I was going to say even where I've analyzed structure, I'm also including language, but I'm not doing that. Okay, so yes, you can still include a little bit of structure and a little bit of language if you want to. Okay, so even here I said in her 5th paragraph, so that could be seen as structure as well. I hope this has helped, and if it does, please give us a thumbs up. And remember that when you analyze the answers or the text that you're given, that you can use those very same techniques in your answers as well. So it's always a good idea to read the text first and then go and answer your questions, even if you're going to go to question 5 first. If you like this video, if it's been helpful, please give us a thumbs up, comment, like, and share. Thanks a lot. Bye.